Hey, Vanessa.
Hi, Dom. How goes it?
It goes well. It goes well.
Oh, look at you with a positive answer. How off-brand. Back to the caves with you until you feel worse.
I took a nap after 3 days in a row of not, 3 nights in a row of not sleeping.
Wow,
And
the nap,
I'm working on a new theory, that sleep
is good for you?
Yeah.
I feel like nap is very much Russian roulette, though. Like, it can destroy you or it can make you. That's you got to roll that nap dice sometimes.
So today we have Eli Lake in 2 parts, I guess.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's mostly part 1, and then there's like a postscript.
Right, some coda. Well, Eli is a social commentator of many topics. He used to write for Bloomberg Opinion and currently writes for the New York Sun.
He has a great podcast called The Re-Education with Eli Lake.
Yeah, which you all should listen to because it's fantastic. It starts with a well-produced monologue that is basically polished opinions that are always fascinating. Often argument-inducing, but fascinating to listen to.
He does admit that he occasionally likes to troll for the funds of it.
Who doesn't?
But not
Who doesn't really?
predominant.
He also came into it without even trying to suss out where you and I are politically, which is great because that would have given him a headache. But it's nice. It's just like I'm just in for the conversation. So I've been waiting for a while to try to get him on because I wanted the excuse. I ended up saying, you know what? There's never going to be a good time, so I just brought him on. And then the Ye controversy happened, and the what else did we talk about?
The Israeli elections.
And a variety of topics that Eli was perfect for. So we talked to him about the role of the artist as a political commentator.
Or lack thereof.
Or lack thereof. The line between politics, morality, and art and creativity. Bit of a history of the Israeli elections, of course. Some political punditry when it came to the midterms, which is also why we invited him after the midterms to record a little tale to the conversation to reflect on how well his predictions panned out. Spoiler, both he and I were mostly wrong.
So it's fun to have him back to reflect on the wrongness. One thing I will note too, for the person who is not as up on their Israeli politics, I will say that Adam and Eli's conversation was a little bit more advanced level. So I do recommend first checking out. Adam did a great episode for The Dispatch, which is kind of like your 101 to Israeli politics, called Bibi's Back Baby. Is that what it was called?
Yep.
Called Bibi's Back Baby. Check that out first, I would say, if you are into Israeli politics.
We'll drop a link in the show notes.
Yeah, and then with that, you'll have the primer that you need to follow along on Adam and Eli going back and forth on these.
Yeah, it very quickly devolved, the Israeli conversation devolved into 2 Jews arguing about Israel while Vanessa stares intently.
Trying to follow the conversation.
Scratching her chin with,
exactly.
With a waspy stolidity.
Hey, I'm not a wasp, despite my appearance.
You have that Catholic blood.
I come from Catholic lineage. All the guilt is of my domain.
Guilt is thee.
And as folks are checking us out on Apple Podcast or whatever podcast player of choice, you should also check out another podcast called Preconceived. We've talked about them before, and they're still kind of a partner of ours.
Yeah, it's hosted by Zale Madnick, and we think there's probably a lot of audience overlap there because his focus is taking, as the title suggests, preconceived notions and try to understand why we hold them and how to break out of them. Shattering thought patterns and breaking out of our epistemic molds. It's kind of the uncertain thing, right? And Zale has a variety of great guests. You can just scroll through the catalog and see authors, thinkers, scientists, psychologists, researchers, the lot. Vanessa, do you have a recommended episode?
Episode 66 called Unorthodox, Leaving Extremist Religion with Gene Steinberg. Lots to explore and check out with Preconceived. So go forth.
So that's it. You know the drill. Follow us on uncertain.substack.com to get both the episodes and the newsletters. You can give us a few schmeckles to get the extra content. And if you want to support us further, 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts go a long way.
Oh, that's the way to do it. 5 stars.
And with that,
Eli Lake.
just recent happenings kind of like collided and gave me a gazillion excuses in 1 week to bring you on. So I actually don't know where to start. There are the areas that I originally wanted to talk to you about, but you also have a generalist perspective on a variety of cultural phenomena. And so I'm just going to throw out a bunch of buckets, and you can pick the first one to start with. So we have the artist formerly known as Kanye. We have Elon Musk. I think it's going to fall into it. We have neoconservatism, and we have the Israeli elections. Am I missing something?
Did you want to? You had texted me earlier that you might want to talk about some like foreign policy stuff and or Mueller investigation.
It falls under the neoconservative bucket, I suppose.
Okay.
And if there's something particularly on your mind, aggravating or pleasing, maybe.
Well, I just published my episode on the Israeli elections called Red Wave Over Israel, where I don't know if you've listened to it. I'm very happy with that episode, and particularly the monologue. Sorry, that sounds immodest, but I tackled the hard thing, which is Itamar Ben-Gvir and his party, which is translated, I guess, into Jewish might or Jewish power.
Might, yeah. I literally just recorded an episode for the Dispatch podcast about the same topic. And it's like it's on my mind as well, like literally 5 minutes before starting. I guess this is a lot of the Israeli-minded people, it's on their mind. And in summary, the Ben-Gvir's party is the Jewish nationalism party. It's extreme far religious messianic right, a faction in Israeli politics that has been anathematized since late 80s and has now been resurgent and laundered back into politics by the machinations of the Netanyahu government and the charisma of Ben-Gvir himself.
I think that's basically right. Yeah, I think it's fair to say it's Meir Kahane inspired, and my episode that is on this spends a bit of time looking at Kahane and the Jewish Defense League and his migration, politically speaking, to what I call, I would say he died as a Judeo-fascist.
Meir Kahane did.
He favored the policy of transfer, which is the forced expulsion of Israeli Arabs from what he considered to be the land of Israel, and that is obviously ethnic cleansing. Now, Itamar Ben-Gvir doesn't go that far. What he says is that he wants to expel disloyal Arabs. And because he's somewhat loose in the definition of what a disloyal Arab is, I believe it allows for what I would say are kind of reasonable, non-racist Israelis to project that he is being reasonable, and it allows for fanatic racist Israelis to say, oh, he's signaling to us.
That's the beauty of the word disloyalty in politics, though, right? You can use it as a blanket to cover whoever they are.
Correct. And that it's a typical demagogue's trick, which is you say something that is provocative and vague, and then you act offended or persecuted when somebody says what you have suggested is barbaric.
How dare you claim that I'm saying that all dissidents should be thrown in prison? I'm not saying that at all. But this dissident, however, definitely deserves being transferred.
But now to steelman it, because I'm deeply uncomfortable. But on the other hand, there are terrorists in Israel who do things that are awful. And there have been spates of, I don't know what you call it, maybe call them terror waves. Like a few years back, there was something called the stabbing intifada, where people like Palestinians inspired by social media would just like at random stab Jews. And okay, so that's terrible. If you're caught, doing that, you should probably, you should go to prison, obviously, at the very least.
And in context, I grew up in Jerusalem during the Second Intifada.
Yeah.
I had buses explode right outside of my high school and friends
Yeah.
blow up. I have no particular sympathy for terrorism of any kind, no matter under what guise
Of course,
and
yeah.
in what kind of legitimation. However, the idea that Arab Israelis who, for whatever reason, for whatever type of radicalization, should be treated in extrajudicial ways is
Totally wrong.
deeply uncomfortable to me. And that's the implication.
This is the irony, is that part of what Ben-Gvir is saying is that the Jewish state has not protected Jewish citizens. I mean, the line that he keeps going back to is that Jews are treated as guests in their own homeland.
Which is absurd. Come on.
It's a demagogic. It's demagogic. Yeah.
Like you can, talking about the American border, for instance, you can, Trump being a demagogue and everything, and you can talk about how he's over-heightening the danger of the border, maybe, but it's absolutely true that American politicians have abdicated their responsibility to enforce border control in the South. That's just a disaster. And it's not just Democrats' fault for that matter. But when you talk about Israeli security, and to claim that the Israeli machine has been abandoning Jews for slaughter or anything like that is absurd. Israel is in many ways shockingly safe nowadays because of heightened security. Now, of course, there has been some upheaval recently, which has been driven more by civil uprising in the Arab-Israeli communities, the Knife Intifada, and most recently the riots in Lod and around the country. Those were a shock to the system because of how radicalized people who have until now been considered integrated or assimilated into society to some extent have turned. So it was a shock, but you need to go a long way to claim that this therefore proves that Israelis are being treated as guests in their own land.
Well, there's an irony, of course, because Kahana's original Jewish Defense League and people inspired by Kahana after his death, like Baruch Goldstein, were themselves, like, at times, terrorists. I mean, Jewish Defense League bombed Soviet, diplomatic consulates and things like that, and also Arab consulates in the name of what they believed was sort of a more just cause. And
both Goldstein, who shut up,
is one of the fiends of Jewish history. I mean, one of the worst.
And Ben-Gvir had his image plastered on his wall until very recently.
Yeah, no, and that that makes him am I allowed to curse on this? Like,
yes.
It's a piece of shit thing to do. So, I end it though by saying, listen, the one thing we can say is that Ben-Gvir now is going to be part of a ruling coalition. His party won 14 seats. And
just for context, is 14 seats like a lot? Is that like...
Yes.
He's the third largest party out of 10 who have made it through the cutoff in the Israeli election.
Okay, so this is... He's coming in with power behind him.
Well, and also just to put it in some context, the first run when Kahana was alive, I mean, here's an irony. Kahana, Judeo-fascist, murdered by an Islamo-fascist in 1990 in New York City. But when Kahana was alive... his high watermark for the Kasiq party was one Knesset seat. And the Likud and the Labor Party, the two dominant parties in Israeli politics, conspired to screw over Kahana and his party by successfully passing a law that made it, that barred him and the party from running in 1988. This time around, the Otzma Yehudit was courted by Netanyahu initially in 2018. And so you didn't have, like, Menachem Begin famously would leave the Knesset when Meir Kahana spoke. He didn't want to even acknowledge it. And so there is something there with, like, Netanyahu sort of making them kosher and encouraging people to sort of vote for various joint lists so he could have a right-wing coalition. So that's an important point to make. On the other hand, Ben-Gvir, his entire life, his entire adult life, he has been an agitator from the outside. He has had the luxury of being somebody who didn't have the responsibility of having power. So he's able to say kind of ridiculous things about the Jewish state without, having to actually think about, like, okay, well, now what would you do? So that is an opportunity. Maybe that will destroy him. Maybe that he will moderate. I mean, his story isn't over yet. He's only 46 years old. So in that respect, what I'm saying is that if it's true that, because he goes out of his way to say, listen, I'm not calling for the transfer, forced expulsion of Israeli Arabs as Kahana did. He says that over and over again. And I'm not trying to make it seem like it's not troubling and he doesn't, in my monologue, I mentioned all the stuff about Barbara Goldstein and everything like that. But I'm saying that this is a new experience. We don't know what he's going to do when he does have influence and power. And we may find out that he will be someone else. And I just would say that maybe it's a kind of corollary, but there was a time when people thought Menachem Begin was a fascist. That was a famous letter from Albert Einstein and Hannah Arendt when he came to America, like on the eve of Israeli independence. And first of all, they were totally wrong about Menachem Begin. He was absolutely not a fascist. He was anti-fascist, and I can get into that at another point. But
and for context, Menachem Begin is the first prime minister in Israel that represented the not Mapai party. Mapai party was the founding and ruling party for 20 years, was it?
Yeah. Before Israeli independence, he was the rival of Ben-Gurion, the kind of George Washington of Israel. And, there were things that he was responsible for, such as, his Etzel forces were responsible for the bombing of the King David Hotel, which was British military headquarters. He practiced guerrilla warfare against the British occupying forces, which at the time the Jewish community known as the Yishuv was against. And people said he was a fanatic because a lot of this. He was also, you could say, the Etzel forces were, along with a Lehi, were responsible for the Deir Yassin massacre, which to this day is kind of part of his legacy. And that led to this view that, like, oh, this guy's a sort of horrible fascist. Well, it turns out that
he was an extremist.
I would say, I guess you could say he's an extremist, but
he wasn't involved in these early days. He was part of the extremist factions of the Israeli independence movement.
Yeah, extremist is kind of a loaded word, but what I would say is that he had a foul odor among the kind of American Zionists at the time, and certainly Ben-Gurion despised him in these days. And anyway, throughout the course of his life, this was in his 30s, like, he proved that he was not only, he was a great Zionist and a great kind of Israeli patriot, but he was the one who ended up making peace with Anwar Sadat, which is the first major peace deal that Israel signed with one of its Arab neighbors. His decision when there was an arms shipment known as on a ship called the Altalena, which is a famous scene, kind of where there was a real danger in the beginning of Israel that you wouldn't have a single monopoly of violence. You wouldn't have a single IDF, which is the Israel Defense Forces. And there was this
paramilitaries.
There's an arms shipment, and there was a big debate over whether some of the guns should go to the Begin affiliated Etzel versus the Haganah. And there was Jews fired on Jews. There was the Haganah fired on the ship. There were casualties. It could have been a civil war at the very moment of Jewish independence. And instead, it turned out that Begin had the kind of courage and vision to stand down his forces and his loyalists. And as a result, you avoided that kind of civil war.
So unthinkable.
Yeah.
Just to add some more color to it, this is a little irony of history, because we like ironies in this conversation, that the Mapai party, that was socialist and worker party, was unsurprisingly much more representative of the elite culture at the time of Israel.
Totally.
And it was Begin who was the first spokesperson for the people who really were second class at the time, the Mizrahi Jews and a lot of the actual working class of Israel, even though his party was technically in favor of more market liberalization.
That's right. And anyway, he's a fascinating figure. And my point only in sort of raising is, I don't want to even, I'm not saying Itamar.
Oh, Vanessa's expression is just, how the fuck did I get stuck in this conversation?
We'll talk about Kanye soon enough if this is not interesting. But the thing is that Itamar Ben-Gvir's story is not yet written. And he has an opportunity to prove many people like myself who think this guy is kind of a proto-fascist wrong. Even though I'm not holding my breath, but I'm saying that, there's a lot of stuff here. And by the way, I could totally see Netanyahu being the cynical Nixonian figure that he is, turning on these religious Zionists and turning on this party and saying, you guys are too extreme. And then having the kind of, and pivoting and trying to break off, say, I don't know, the Avigdor Lieberman faction of the anti-Bibi coalition.
We were again, this is something that we were just talking about. The idea that Netanyahu is necessarily going to create this coalition, the expected far-right coalition, misunderstands Netanyahu, because Netanyahu is not really a far-right leader. He is the king of status quo, and he is one of the most impressive politicians in terms of really being able to hold 17 different plates in the air.
Yep.
And there is a non-zero chance that he leverages the fact that there is a threat of a religious messianic takeover of the politics and say, hey, look, Lapid, Gantz, whoever, the centrists and the center-right parties, I know you hate me. I know you literally formed a government to oust me last year, but it's either you join me and give me what I want in terms of my judicial reform, et cetera, or I'm making deals with the Kahanists. So what is it going to be?
Yeah, no, that's a fascinating thing. I didn't mean to I don't want to be naive about it. There's a lot of really bad things about Itamar Ben-Gvir, but what I am saying is that it's funny how once you see some of these outsiders get power, they can become very different people. And you see it all the time, by the way. I mean, if you look at like the Tea Party in American politics, right? And then you compare that to the MAGA movement. It's like everybody
can draw lines.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's fascinating to me to see what happens to political figures that begin their career as these firebrands on the outside. And then once they have power, you find them, they kind of get moderated and corrupted. It's like a cycle of things.
Yeah, but then you have cases like, take Ted Cruz, has a start in the Tea Party talking about small government and respecting the Constitution. And by 2020, completely throwing all of that away by January 6th specifically. And you can start thinking that maybe it's really just about rank populism and his taste for arsonism that's guiding him.
Yeah, but he wants power.
Yeah, well, don't they all?
No, but I mean, like, he really wants power. He's got his eye on the prize, you know.
Wait, I want to just circle back to make sure I understand, the beginning of this conversation, which is, where do we derive the popularity of this of this movement now that's taking over the Israeli parliament?
Here,
is it parliament?
You got to read a piece from Armin Rosen in Tablet magazine, which is a profile of Ben-Gvir. He was just in Israel, and he interviewed him too.
Phenomenal piece.
You got to read that because I learned so much from it. I got to shout out to Armin Rosen. You guys should have him on this podcast. He's so good. That piece really puts it out there. And what he says is there's a lot of people, and I talked to people in Israel about this too, by the way, who were not Kahanists and aren't settlers. But for whatever reason, they're like, listen, this tech miracle in Israel kind of left us behind. And rents are too damn high and we can't afford a place. And nothing seems to, there's a kind of dissatisfaction on the losers in the tech economy in Israel. Some of it is that. Some of it is also that there really has been some insecurity or a sense of insecurity, similar to America, like where there's crime. You may not be able to show it with statistics, but there, in the 2021 war with Gaza, there were these sorts of, I don't know, like there were moments where because a lot of the cities are in Israel and towns are called mixed. They have Arab and Jewish people. Yeah. And there was a concern that there were some of the neighbors were, reacting to the latest war in such a way that there was a sense of insecurity.
There were riots in cities that I don't remember seeing in my time. So yeah, I can understand that anxiety, but it's interesting about the more populist economic insecurity point, because it's true. And that's hardly discussed because you see that under the Netanyahu 12 years of market liberalization and the ascent of tech, Israel has turned from an economic backwater to one of the world's top 20 economies. But it has kind of become a single crop state. Like, it only does tech. There is nothing else. If you want to have the ability to have a living wage in any other industry, but tech is strained at best, and
natural gas.
or natural, sure. If you happen to own natural gas or be part of the extraction efforts, then yes, you make good money. But it's true, and though it is happening here as well.
I see the parallels here for sure. Yeah. The only people I know who are comfortable in making a good living are in tech right now. Anyone I know who took a different path is struggling. So,
vote Trump.
Well,
yeah.
But anyway, so it sounds like that this politician is tapping into kind of the currents that are happening. The people feel left behind. It sounds like he also has some like Netanyahu shine a bit in recent, and so these things are converging to make him popular.
Yeah, and he has this look like he's schlubby, but like he looks like a common man. Like if you look at Yair Lapid, the last prime minister, or the current prime minister, I guess, who's about to lose his coalition. He's like really in shape. He's very handsome and charismatic. And like, you look at like Itamar Ben-Gvir, and he does look looks like Bluto from Animal House or something. Like he's just like, he's a schlub. But, and I think there is something that appeals to it. I do think that he taps into something that's deep in like the Israeli soul, which is, he says that line that Jews should not be treated as guests in their own homeland. And that goes back to Begin, and it goes back to something really deep about Zionism. Like, we're going to demonstrate that this is our homeland. And that sense that, like, in the shadow of the Holocaust, like the Jewish people, their resilience, and we're not going to be pushed around. And that gets to something that's like hard for me as a diaspora Jew to appreciate. Although I can appreciate it kind of by knowing history, but like I think that he's kind of stirring that up as well.
It's interesting about the schlebiness that you pointed out. Yeah. It does have a kind of a Huey Long charm.
Yes,
in his populism.
Very good. That was smart. That was very smart. Yes. Another demagogue, another populist. What did he say? He said like, spoils for my friends, and what do your enemies get? Good government.
Okay, so that was our Israeli bucket. Talking about charisma, let's talk about Ye.
Sure.
So is it Ye? You're the super fan.
It's Ye. It's Ye.
Ye.
I guess I'm a super fan. I really do think he's a genius, and I appreciate his music. I don't have a feel for his footwear. I should say I'm not a sneakerhead. So it's like that to me is like, I don't know, I guess.
I'm generally not into swag.
Yeah, I'm not into swag as much either. I can't really, so it's hard for me to judge his fashion. It's not my style, but like, again, I don't want to like, it's hard. I can't quite understand that. I do think he's a fascinating figure because I do think he's a legit musical genius who has chosen to also be a celebrity in the reality television space, which I always associated with that's fame for people with no talent.
Right.
And here's a guy who's bursting with talent, who seems almost more interested in becoming famous in that context, which I have to say is really interesting. Like why he, the fact that he had this marriage to Kim Kardashian. And what's Kim Kardashian's great skill? And I shouldn't say this because my wife is like a huge, like she loves that stuff, but like I don't get it, like.
But I want to drill into your claim, your bold claim of Ye's genius. I don't actually dispute it, but there is a right and wrong answer as to why he's a genius. So what's yours?
Oh, because he's, in my view, David Samuels wrote a famous piece about him at the height of his like cultural power called American Mozart. I say that Ye is the American Miles Davis, which is to say, for the genre of hip hop music, I think he's changed it maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times in the way that Miles changed jazz over the course of his career. And it also, by the way, this is very similar to like someone like Bob Dylan, another genius, who just as everybody was like really getting into like when the Dylan's folk sound, he goes electric, and just as everyone's getting into electric, he decides to put out a couple country records. And just as like they're into that sound, he decides he's going to find Jesus and do Christian rock. And I love that in that he constantly, he's always furtive and moving on to the next thing. And his catalog and his output reflects that. So he, comes on the scene as a producer. He's probably like the last great producer of the golden era of hip hop in the 1990s. He meets up, he hooks up with Jay-Z. You listen to an album like The Blueprint or the Black Album, Kanye is like all over that. And then, his first album, College Dropout, is just a stone cold classic. And the two that he does after that are kind of similar, but they get more intricate, and he adds more layers. And you can hear, like on the second album, there's a song called We Major, where there's just a breakdown, which is a beautiful piece of original music. Sounds like it could have been on a Stevie Wonder record. Then he does 808s and Heartbreak by pitch filtering his voice and then using it and exploring how he can use his voice and create and like almost become, to bend it in ways that make it sound more computer and robotic, which we hear, auto-tune and that style with T-Pain and everything else like that. Well, Kanye really kind of does that in the hip hop world before almost everybody else. And then, you have something like it's My Dark Twisted Beautiful Fantasy, My Beautiful Dark Twist. I forget exactly what that record is. Maybe the greatest hip hop record ever made. It's much more than just taking these samples and then rapping over it. He's creating symphonies with little pieces of sound. He's like a brilliant collage artist. In my monologue on Kanye that I released a couple weeks ago in the middle of all this stuff, and I talked about, I kind of try to draw the similarity with Ezra Pound, but it's this idea that when you're exploring, like when you think of Ezra Pound's epic poem, The Cantos, literary professors, but people who are real scholars on this will say it's like a kind of almost a catalog or like a journal of one man's like really deep reading of stuff. Like it's his interaction with these texts. And there's another thing which I didn't put in the monologue, but I think is really interesting that, there's a great CIA, a really important kind of like one of the founders of the CIA, James Eustace Angleton, who when he was at Yale started a poetry review, and he was in touch with Ezra Pound. And sometimes he would ask Ezra Pound for contributions, but sometimes Ezra Pound would just give him quotes from other stuff he was reading. Well, it strikes me that's a version of what hip hop producers do. So they take from sounds and things from before and they create something new out of it. And that is and Kanye is brilliant at that. And he will take, a version of a song and then add certain things. And like, that's musical genius. So he does the My Dark Twist, which I think is a great high watermark for him. And then, he keeps moving. I mean, the next one of note to me is Yeezus, which is a really grimy, almost post-industrial record. It doesn't even in some ways sound like rap. And that takes a lot. And then I really like, it's debatable, but I think he has another resurgence in the Trump era after he comes out as a Trump guy. He releases an album called Yay, and then Kids See Ghosts, and then Jesus is King. Those three records I think are absolutely brilliant. I like that he is somebody who is a hip hop artist who, as a rapper, is from the very beginning with Jesus Walks. He's bringing in religious themes and things that normally we just don't associate with it. And so he's got for me, an amazing kind of catalog. I'm still absorbing the two Donda releases that he's done. I find the first one is really good. But anyway, I think he continues to put out quality work. That's kind of if you think about it, that alone put out relevant and important records since he started putting them out in like 2003, 2004. And now it's almost 20 years later. That's a kind of miracle too, if you think about the shelf life and relevancy. Right. I mean, Jay-Z, I guess he put out 414, but I don't know that Jay-Z after the Black Album, I would say that, then it's very uneven. Kanye is still putting out great stuff. So
I was going to just start getting into this issue of the artist versus the art.
Politics.
And the politics, yeah. And
right, and Ezra Pound is a good segue.
Yeah, I mean, this is a topic that you talk about a lot in your podcast. I think you've had a couple episodes like teasing out to what extent we want to hold artists accountable for what they say politically versus do we just ignore it and only focus on the art and relate to the artist via the art in the way that is more meaningful and useful to our time and kind of find perhaps their political leanings irrelevant. I do think that there's there, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that there's like a hierarchy when we're talking about artists, and there's the kind of celebrity that you were talking about earlier of like no talent, celebrity, no talent, celebrity with talent, and genius. And I feel like we are much more likely to give a pass to the genius for having questionable political ideologies,
Sure.
because we want to interact with them, and their genius level work is so worth talking. Whereas when you get into the middle place, you get into a bit of a murkier category now, because it's like, how talented are they? Do we justify it versus do we just stop buying their work? You know what I'm saying? Like I feel like it's more difficult to have this conversation when you're talking about not the geniuses.
Well, and it's how do you know, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to say, because it's like, if you're a genius, you're probably going to have a huge amount of work. But, I guess there's some artists who produce a lot of work and none of it's good. I mean, like in one of my earliest episodes called The Art and the Artist, I led with the idea of Kenny G being a phenomenally great guy. By all accounts, by the way, Kenny G, I think, makes terrible schlock. But, listen, he's a great guy. He's a great dad, scratch golfer, nice investor, totally great with his fans. And there are legions of them. And there's a lot of people with bad taste. But Kenny G is really good to all of them. And he just seems like a great guy. And yet,
someone needs to cater to the people with bad taste.
Yeah, exactly. And yet, like, when you go through like the legends of jazz music, like Charlie Parker, terrible guy, I like to think about the Beatles because, by all accounts, Paul McCartney is a genius and a great guy. Like, by all accounts, McCartney's a really good guy. John Lennon, terrible guy, but essential. So what are you going to do? So anyway, but I totally take your point, and you can't really know. And I would rather be more tolerant than less tolerant. My issue is, like, on the one hand, if you're just talking about like what you choose to listen to, if you don't want to listen to R. Kelly anymore, I totally understand. What R. Kelly did is terrible. I think R. Kelly is in the genius category. He's put out a lot of great stuff, but that's a personal choice. When it gets to coordinated campaigns that are going to pressure streamers or platforms or radio stations or whatever it is to basically try to create something that Dream Hampton, the journalist, called a cultural death. Well, first of all, who are we punishing when we do that? Are we punishing the artists that are still alive? Well, to a certain extent, yes. But we're also kind of punishing us, considering the fact that, listen, R. Kelly should be in jail right now for what he did. But if there was a jailhouse recording studio, I bet he could probably put together a banger in an afternoon. Let's be honest. I mean, he's some people have it, some people don't. Okay. And that's how I felt like about why Ezra Pound was such an interesting story. Because if you go back, and I did listen to a lot of his radio addresses when he was, help broadcasting on Mussolini's Radio Roma. And I thought more and more as I was listening to him, like, this is not convincing anybody. This is nuts. And it's fascinating because he's an amazing poet, maybe one of the greatest poets to ever live in the English language. But it's not like he's an effective propagandist. I mean, I can't imagine an American.
Would it have mattered if he were? Would it have changed your opinion on him?
No, on this, I'm pretty clear. Like, I just think that you got to just let him cook, even though he's got horrible politics and criticizes politics. But my thing is that, like, it's interesting is that he was tried in absentia and convicted for treason, which would get you executed normally. But then to spare his execution, he was declared insane, and he spent like 13 years in a mental institution, which I would imagine was kind of a hindrance to his creative work. And it strikes me as, like, again, who are we punishing? Because we're going to read Ezra Pound's poetry for centuries. And did we not get as much poetry from Ezra Pound as a result of that? And by the way, when he was through with his experience in the mental institution, as I say it in the thing, he was a broken man, and he kind of soon after went into the last 10 years of his life, basically kind of a self-imposed silence, and wouldn't barely speak.
Okay, so before I want to actually play devil's advocate to what you just said.
Okay.
But before that, let me just like do the throat clearing for myself. Every once in a while when I talk about, you can read J.K. Rowling without getting angry about this, and people would say, "Oh, you're not transgender yourself. You don't know how it affects your sexuality." So, sure, fair enough, sure, whatever. I don't know. With I feel like, okay, he's talking about the Jews, and I'm part of this satanic cabal that he's talking about, so I can attest that I don't give a shit. Do I think that there is potential social problems associated with it? Yes, and we'll get to that. But does it affect my listening of my dark, beautiful, twisted, whatever? Not at all. I hear it for what it is, and maybe it's because I've been trained. First of all, as a Jew, I think if you give up on all rabid anti-Semites, you lose half of literature and half of classical music. And I'm like, I'm not passing on the good stuff. I'm going to read Dostoevsky, and I'm going to read The Master and Marguerite, and fuck you. I'm going to enjoy it. Yeah. I'm not going to enjoy Wagner because I find him dull, but too much pathos for me, but not because of the anti-Semitism. So that's my throat clearing. And with Ye's current outbursts, and we didn't actually set it up, but I assume that people are plugged enough to know that he has been talking not just mild anti-Semitism, but, textbook anti-Semitism. Textbook. It's like almost a joke. It's like literally reading the cliches from the dictionary definition of Jew-baiting propaganda. So I don't care. Does not affect my emotional connection to his work. But to play devil's advocate, your assumption in saying who does it hurt when we punish these artists, it actually implying that it actually hurts us. We hurt ourselves. We hurt the culture by ostracizing these.
Well, let's be specific. I don't think we're hurting anybody. I think it's important to say, I like Kanye's music, but this is anti-Semitic, and you shouldn't say it and criticize that. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about,
of course,
anything that
is a coordinated effort to limit their ability to express themselves.
Right. Either limit the distribution or affect them in such a way. Like if you put him in a mental institution, could Kanye still, it's hard for me to know because I have never been in a mental institution and committed to that. But I would imagine that if you were a creative person and you couldn't leave a facility and you had to take certain drugs or whatever it was, that might affect your creative output. And I'm saying that if
your creativity,
if you diminish the creativity of some of these bad artists or problematic artists, then who is punished? It's the rest of us who enjoy their art.
But I know that there's a distinction between, like, when we're talking about R. Kelly versus Ezra Pound, which is the first time I've ever made this comparison. But we recognize that R. Kelly should be in jail, and we will take the cultural hit because he has done things that he needs to be in jail for, right? And we as a culture have to say, well, unfortunately, we will be deprived of future R. Kelly songs.
But that's law, right? That's breaking the law.
And I agree with you. That's a matter of law. Yes.
Right. Versus Ezra Pound, it's a little more.
Well, he did violate the law technically.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the question is, to what extent are his political actions hurting us? And I think you could probably ask the same of Ye, right? To what extent are them just espousing their political beliefs actually causing hurt in a way that their creative output should be curbed because they need to be taken out of the cultural sphere, for example?
That's Vanessa. That is a very, very shrewd observation. Just want to say it's very good. I don't think that you can say, I don't know. I wouldn't call it political hurt because but I'm just saying they can. I don't think that there is I don't think we should frame it that way. If Norman Mailer famously stabbed his wife, and I suppose if he was convicted by a jury of his peers, he should pay for that. But Norman Mailer also, it's worth going back. There's a famous scene of one of the early second wave feminist conferences. He gives a completely offensive speech in which, anyway, well, we can curse on this. He talks about his dick, but then I think he makes reference that he has a dildo in his. It's totally offensive and kind of he was trolling. Okay. And you know what? It's really offensive and I can totally understand it, but you know what? You got to let him cook. He's a great novelist and essayist, and I don't have to co-sign on stuff, but so in my view, I distinguish between artists who violate the law and, I think that everybody is equal under the law in our societies versus like these kinds of what makes say kind of crossing various kinds of cultural lines.
So words are not sufficient.
It's not even about words versus like deeds or like, so it's not even that. It's more like this is how I would describe it. It's more that I gotta distinguish between whatever your politics are, whatever you're putting your energies into, anything like that. It's like that should not affect, the availability of your art, and that it should stand on its own. And like the inverse of that is we who are not artistic geniuses, but who are in the cultural space, either as writers or whatever, like we should probably stop looking to these artists for our political guidance. Like, why would we care what Kanye West has to say about a lot of these things? And I realize, it's easy for me to say that there are people who really do care, but like we have to just get out of it. I mean, like, I can fully understand the idea that my favorite recording artists are going to have terrible politics. That's normal. I get it. Like, I'm not asking the political leaders I most admire to record banger hip hop tracks. You know what I mean?
But actually, there's a nuance there, because when we're talking about what Vanessa called in the lowest tier of celebrity, which is the no talent celebrity, right? Then it's very easy to say, what do I care about what they have to say? What do I care about what they have to say about literally anything? They exist to entertain me. They are visual or auditory props. But when you're talking about somebody that you consider a genius, that implies that they did something that was connected with your spirit, with your soul, with your inner world,
for sure,
in a meaningful way. And that's where morality exists. When politicians, in fact, I don't expect to be moral guidance.
No. Our innermost soul, like, you got to accept, man, that there's these like animal spirits. There's going to be things that art is going to show you that is not going to be like you're going to want to see necessarily. Morality, politics, that exists on a different plane. When you're talking about...
No, it's morality and politics that are separate.
I agree, but I'm saying that like something that's artistic greatness is not necessarily going to adhere to what you think is the right morality. It's going to probably challenge it.
No. I didn't say it would inform it. It's not pedagogical, but it touches the place where morality is informed, I think, to some extent. The whole point, experiencing masterpieces, masterworks in literature, is that they touch and challenge parts of your moral presuppositions, sometimes even affecting them to a change. They're not divorced from the moral world.
I'm not enough of maybe of a philosopher. I have to brush up on my philosophy. I don't know about that. I kind of feel like
philosophy even. I mean, think of how you're impacted by works of literature and that you really admire. Do you just say, oh, this is just literature. It opened my mind to experiences, but it didn't make me at all question some of my presuppositions?
Okay, that's fair. Great literature, yes, I think you're right. Great literature can change how you think about things, and it can have a downstream effect on your politics for sure. But the point that I would make in counter to that is that I want that realm of literature and art to be fluid enough that I'm not drawing boundaries based on what the downstream effect might be. You follow me? So it's like, I think it's okay. Like, you're going to read some, I'm trying to think of a great piece of literature that had this effect on me. Like, I guess when I read like Orwell's Politics in the English Language in 1984 and Animal Farm, that certainly laid the groundwork for me in my anti-fascist politics today, or my small L liberal politics today, for sure.
All the libertarians who read The Fountainhead.
Yeah, well, the Fountainhead's, it's funny, like when I was young and I read that, I was like, this is amazing. She's absolutely right. You know what I mean? Like, everyone's a fucking sheep and I'm out here and like, it's just that the world belongs to the winners. Then you like get a little older and you're like, that's a little too much Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
The very interesting thing about Ayn Rand is that she hated William F. Buckley, and William F. Buckley hated her. And so she was never really incorporated into the mainstream conservative. She would be natural for the conservatives, right? She should be part of the conservatives, but that personal, those two geniuses hated each other. So
that figures. But like for me, Crime and Punishment,
sure.
and again, written by a problematic author, and actually,
is Dostoevsky now considered problematic?
I don't know. I mean, people.
Everyone's problematic.
Everyone's
Who
problematic. But I consider it incredibly challenging morally, and certainly it's not even not attempting to be a guidebook for ethics, but it did shape a lot of my appreciation of the human condition and how people approach justice, how people pervert justice in themselves. It taught me a lot about those supposedly relegated realms of politics and morality.
Yeah. Okay. You've convinced me. That's a very good point, especially on
Eli, thank you so much for joining us.
on the literature point. That's an excellent point. I was thinking about what you're saying about like problematic authors.
Mm-hmm.
It always goes in one direction, doesn't it? Right. And I kind of want to do it in the other direction sometimes, to be like, you know what? I still read Love, and I still think we should read Love in the Time of Cholera, even though Gabriel Garcia Marquez was hoodwinked by Fidel Castro and went to his grave as a commie. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's always the other one. It's always the other direction. It was like, yeah, no, it's a really good novel, but he was, he's kind of a misogynist. Like, Picasso was a really bad guy when it came away. Anyway.
I mean,
although I will say that Love in Times of Cholera was not the legitimate book. You
didn't like it? I thought it was great.
I hated it. I love 100 Years of Solitude, my formative novel, but that's not, no.
Oh my God, you didn't like Love in the Time of Cholera? It's a beautiful story.
No.
It's a beautiful story about finding love when you're like at the end of your life. What a
God,
great...
I hated the two main characters so fucking much. When they finally got together, I like, fuck you. I think one of them leaves his wife I preferred the wife. I like the wife. I don't like this.
Listen, I read it when I was a very young man, when I was in Europe on a really long train ride to the south of Portugal, but
enchanted by the landscape.
Yeah, and I was like in the middle of a really great romantic affair at the time with this hot Australian woman, and it was dope. I was like, this book is so good.
That's the amazing thing about literature. It's 100% dependent on where you are in your life when you read it.
I think that's true. I think it's true. But it's also, it's like that's what the other thing is this. It's a secondary point on this, but it's like I want great writers and great artists to feel that they can create without worrying that there's like somebody looking over their shoulder,
right? Who's
going to like say they're problematic and try to cancel them because you're writing in the voice of a Mexican American when you're not stop it. Mm-hmm. Let these artists be art. Let them cook and like deal with the art as it's. If you think the art fails for its reasons, then that's important, you know what I mean? And I don't try to do that kind of criticism. I'm more of, or maybe I should get more into it as I get older, but like, that's fine. But don't tell me that I found it back to sort of to put it back, circled back to Ye. Mm. When he came out with this album called Ye, and I would encourage listeners who like good music to listen to it. The last 4 songs of it are brilliant, in my opinion. And I thought this is a real artistic triumph. And the review in like the Daily Beast, my former publication, was so negative. And I thought it was only negative because of Ye's fucked up politics. And it didn't actually deal with the art and the work that they were talking about.
You actually brought in something that I wanted to at least touch on, which is just a pet peeve of mine in the whole Ye Traversy, that when Ye started talking about...
KANtreversYE. Okay, no, it didn't work. I tried and I failed. Good. Continue.
KANtreversYE?
KANtreversYE.
KANtreversYE.
That's not bad. Yeah.
When Ye went MAGA and started, trying to bring down I don't know, norms, Democrats' norms, liberal norms, or push back against stuff that were taken for granted by the cultural elite, you suddenly saw people who wrote, spoke, and ranted about how much they hate rap talk about, this is a good artist. And that embarrassed me and cringed me out so much. It's stop. There's something on the right specifically. If the left's problem is that they take for granted that they are the cultural hegemon,
Right.
on the right, there's so much envy, cultural envy, that whenever an artist just winks at them, they cream their pants.
I think it's kind of a fair point. I mean, in the case of Ye, like he's a legit. I mean, like, I don't know, who did the Republicans have before Ye? Kid Rock, the Oak Ridge Boys. It's been lonely, especially in the musical space. If you're a Republican, you know what I mean. You don't.
Right.
Five for Fighting. That's another one that's like come out for the GOP. Can you hear a funny story about Kid Rock and the Republican Party?
Sure.
In 2004, I know, I'm an old guy now. In 2004, they wanted to have Kid Rock at the Republican convention. And it was vetoed at the last minute because he had a lyric about doing Barbara Bush in the tush.
Oh.
Swear to God.
Oh, sweet days.
Yeah.
Sweet, innocent days. Yeah.
Unless you want to espouse upon this point, Eli.
No.
About the creaming of the pants and whatnot.
The creaming of pants and what was it? What in the tush?
and
Barbara Bush.
Barbara Bush in the tush. Right.
Yeah.
Bush in the tush.
No, I have a theory that I've just come up with, and it's probably very half-baked, but I'm wondering if some of this addiction to pushing artists into having the right political ideology and narratives, I wonder if it comes a little bit from people feeling overwhelmed by the content options for them to consume. And I wonder if it's a bit of a, like, if I have so much in front of me, I can't listen to it all. I'm going to sieve out people who don't agree with me politically because politics is everything now and it matters so much that I will use this as one of my determining factors for what I should even
filter.
bother. Yeah, my filter. Like maybe
I hadn't
it's
thought
like
about that, but
That's genius.
That's genius.
unconscious
Yeah. I hadn't thought
filter.
about that. That's really smart.
I have no idea if there's any merit in it, but I wonder if it's like a coping mechanism.
That's
Wow.
fucking brilliant. At a minimum, it definitely allows people to let go of artists that otherwise they might cling to more strongly because they know that there's going to be others to fill in the void. But maybe there is something even more subtle that there's just subconsciously they're applying this filter because there's too much. I'm fucking suffocated.
And the gatekeepers are no longer there to tell them what's good and what's not, right? And you're just inundated.
So you don't have anything but half-baked morality to call out your art.
And to feel good about the art that you consume, right? Like you want to feel, part of what you're doing is you're creating, you're I guess the way that you're filtering your algorithms and your Instagram feeds is like, I want to feel good about myself. And so I'm just choosing what it is. And so I think that's becoming the filter by which people want to consume anything.
I love it.
There might also be a type that would seek out artists that have been, anathematized because they want the transgressive experience too.
So you're saying it's having the opposite effect.
I'm saying it depends on the person, right? And there might be like an artist that nobody kind of knew. I mean, this is not an artist, but there's a Philadelphia Philly, like one of the greatest pitchers for the Phillies ever, named Steve Carlton. Steve Carlton, at some point early in his career with the Phillies, had a very bad experience during spring training with an Inquirer journalist who reported on his like carousing after the game or something. And he decided from that point on he was not going to speak to anybody from the press. And there was a famous joke at the time in baseball, which was like, who speaks like there's only one person who speaks less English than Fernando Valenzuela. It's Steve Carlton. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so Steve Carlton, who is totally silent for all these years, superb, stellar, great pitcher, gets in the Hall of Fame. Finally, like some Inquirer reporter catches up with him at his ranch in Colorado And guess what? It turns out that Steve Carlton is like a crazy anti-government, anti-Semite lunatic. And it's like, they're doing this whole thing where it's like, and I remember as a kid, I was reading this piece. I was like, oh, that's what happened to Steve Carlton. Maybe he should have just kept his mouth shut. Like,
Right.
it's like, so sometimes you find out like an artist that you really like has these views that you can't imagine. Like, why does he think that? You know, I don't know.
But when you said that they seek out transgression, they seek out the experience of transgression, I wonder now, just because now we're completely theorizing on unprovable psychology, the idea that
Welcome to the
because we
podcast.
live in such a libertine society when it comes to cultural mores. I mean, we're in a post-South Park society. Seemingly, like everything is allowed. At this point, you need to anathematize things in order to have something to transgress again. You're actually creating the transgressive. You're making the anathemata in order that there is a transgression later on.
Can't have the sacred without the profane.
Exactly. So okay, we have there's some unprovable theories.
Does it? Do any of our unprovable theories explain the desire to excise artists of the past, though? Like what is deemed acceptable now? That is like, it's not like you're gonna have Ezra Pound poetry on your Instagram feed, so you don't have to filter that out so much. But if somebody wants to problematize Ezra Pound now and say let us excise him from the canon, like, where does the instinct come from?
First of all, stop excising people. Second of all, what are we trying to accomplish, like, with all of this? I mean, like,
Right.
let's get back to Ye just for a second, okay?
Sure.
The argument, and I kind of understand it, is that it's very important to have, like, everybody say, this is not okay for you to say this if you're a celebrity on a big platform. And that when we do that, we are strengthening a norm against toxic and dangerous anti-Semitic ideas. And there is some sort of value in that. But then you have to look at it from this perspective, which is that in the era that we're in, when people can find other like-minded people all over the world that agree with them, it's not the way that it was. It's not like, it used to be like, we used to have a Walter Cronkite who, sifted through and filtered out all of the stuff for the news, and millions of Americans would watch him. And that was a very powerful position. And it used to really matter. Like, if you were a comedian and you didn't get on Johnny Carson, then you will not have a career. And like, the stakes were very high for that sort of thing. So those gatekeepers, but we don't have that anymore. People will find what they're going to find. So that's the first point. It doesn't mean that there can't be norms, that we have places that we kind of create de facto, that this is a respectable place or something like that. But like, where is Kanye saying these crazy things? He's saying them on podcasts, which, I love podcasts. I have one. You guys have one. I'm just like, we love podcasts, but it's not like, it's not like he's saying it on it's not saying it on CNN.
Right.
And the other point is that,
Well, he was saying it on Fox News, apparently.
Oh, I guess he was saying it on Fox News, but they edited it out, right?
And forgot to mention.
That's actually interesting that they edited. I mean,
that's very incriminating for Fox News, if anything.
I don't know. I disagree.
You think?
But I stand out like a sore thumb on this one.
No, so I'd love to hear.
Well, it's just like, I've never been in the television business, but I know a little bit about it, and it's like, if you do a 2-hour interview, you're going to edit it down
a ton.
And yeah, exactly. So,
I mean, for whatever my experience in news production, that's not editing down content. That's the sort of stuff that at a minimum you send out on a website, because
hold on, but isn't that like, if you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't? Like, if you decide to highlight that,
right. You can be
highlight it, then you're like,
for espousing this.
I mean, there's also a problem.
anti-Semitism.
But Tucker Carlson was also, you're not espousing it, you're exposing it. The Tucker Carlson,
but you're quote unquote platforming it.
No, but now you're. First of all, the Tucker Carlson segment was framed as a rehabilitation of.
He's normal. He's normal. Stop saying he's crazy.
And then
he just cares about unborn babies.
Right, exactly. Is one of us, basically.
I see.
Nothing to see here.
So there was something deceptive about
Yeah, and then you're just
painting
brushing
him
it
as a
under the
normal
rug.
guy when in fact he was saying all this other crazy anti-Semitic shit.
Yeah, I think that's not. I think there's.
But my point is that if you want to strengthen the norm, it's like maybe the best way to treat it is like, well, I wasn't turning to Kanye for like what is acceptable, like for media theory. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not. So on the one hand, it's like if you decide to make it a big deal, then, you know, you're opening up another segment of the audience that doesn't respect any gatekeepers or any kind of ground. So I don't know. It's like, what is the end goal? The end goal is to kind of enforce these norms to say these kinds of things are, you shouldn't be able to say that. But then it gets into like problems when we don't have, I mean, I think we do have a consensus in our society about basic, like some of this really extreme anti-Semitism. Like it's not okay to say that all the Jews like run the media and the banks and that kind of thing. But like we don't have a consensus right now on whether you can say that a man can't get pregnant. And that used to, until Elon Musk took over Twitter, that would get you kicked off of Twitter. And it was like you were trying to enforce the norm before you had buy-in from everybody else.
Yeah, I love that point that you do make several times on your pod. The norms are strongest when they take you actually let them go through the intellectual struggle of settling culturally before you try to force people to not think otherwise. And sometimes it takes a while, but then once the norm sticks, it's much stickier.
It's resilient.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's kind of the definition of a norm, right? It has to reach some sort of tipping point consensus to become a norm.
Right. And what I think was happening, and hopefully it's about to be over, was that there was a sense among, you know, progressive activists and big tech that they could short circuit the organic process of persuading lots of people that this is, when you think about it this way, and just impose it by saying we're not going to be able to, we're going to throttle this kind of speech. We're not going to let you say this kind of thing. We're going to treat this as if this is hate speech. And I think that that's really rubbing a lot of Americans the wrong way. And I think it's one of the factors that's probably going to lead to a red tsunami in the midterms next week.
Yeah, that's yep, that's probably coming.
It is, and it's like you know what I mean. And I say this as somebody who is horrified by January 6th, would never vote for Donald Trump, agrees with the Democrats when it says when they make the point that it's like, listen, you can't have a president who basically creates a campaign to delegitimize the election that he lost. I agree with all that. I'm in agreement. But what I can't take is when the same party then goes ahead and does things that also undermine democracy, like agitating to censor the political speech of their adversaries, which they have been doing, or politicizing the FBI, which they did. And like that's where I get like it's like I'm like I don't know what that's why I'm a neither Trumper as opposed to a never Trumper.
Yeah, I like that phrase of yours. I don't know what to do with moments like these when you I felt it very acutely during 2020 when every second your attention has to jump between something that Trump is doing than something that's happening on the progressive obsession with making excuses for riots and looting. So much in the spectrum between stupid and evil that was taking place and is still taking place, or at least stupid and wrong, that is also clashing, that you feel like you're constantly in the center of two giant walls of water. I'm so sorry of my mosaic influences. I'm just imagining those Charlton Heston standing between those two walls of water. But you don't always need to pay attention to both sides at the same time or on the same matters. So for instance, when we're talking about elections, each election has a different risk factor. And sometimes around the country, because it's so big, but also so overly nationalized by its news consumption, you'd have states that vote on problems that are happening in another state while then giving a pass to corrupt people on their side. And this way, in New York, a lot of the bad policies that in my opinion, bad policies that Hochul is going to get a pass for are because of the fears and concerns around January 6th and the repealing of Roe. And I don't know, I find it very hard to believe that abortion rights in New York State are currently at risk, or that electing a Democrat as the governor of New York will have any effect on democracy writ large. On the other hand, you have real election deniers being positioned and probably winning positions of power where they could potentially overturn an election in 2024, regardless of the vote, or even completely obfuscate the vote in real time, being pushed forward because of panic about cancel culture, for instance, or critical race theory and things that don't really have a grip in their state.
Push back a little bit on that.
Go ahead.
One reason why we are at risk of election deniers winning elections is because
Democrats
the Democratic Party spent millions of dollars to support them in primaries against non-election deniers.
Yeah, that's totally reprehensible, and I'm not exonerating these assholes.
So that's one.
But that's not the only factor.
No, I understand it's not the only thing, but two, there is a kind of march to the institutions by the super woke and people who have dumb ideas and I would say anti-racism, as explained by Ibram X. Kendi and many people who kind of are, in his orbit. I think that's an anti-democratic idea. I think it's fundamentally undermines the basic compact of our country in that the Democrats are claiming to support. Anti-racism is focused on having equal outcomes, not just an equal process. And the proposed policy fix is that you would audit every government program to make sure that it's sufficiently anti-racist in the Ibram X. Kendi view of it. To which I sort of say that sounds terrible. It sounds like you're rigging the entire, I don't know. And I don't think there's any kind of so I think that's a legitimate concern, even if it's not necessarily true that the schools are as bad as some people say. But I think there has been some stuff that's been done in terms of the school curriculum and the attitude we saw in Virginia last year in the governor's race that McAuliffe was saying that parents shouldn't have a say in what, the curriculum is. And there were lots of people who were trying to defend that proposition, like Nicole Hannah-Jones on television. And I just think that's wrong.
Side note, I think that might have been one of the most amazing moments of political, I don't know if malfeasance or miscalculation, but at a time where even liberals are starting to hate on teachers union, McAuliffe shares a stage with a teacher union head and goes on to completely endorse their right to control not just curriculum but also school closures. That was phenomenal.
It's horrible. And
but that was just being a really dumb politician.
No, hold on. But there's a reason why they were dumb. There's a reason why they're dumb. Okay. The reason that the Democrats are so politically inept right now is because they have a closed loop. Because they came into after January 6th saying that there was no legitimacy of the Republican Party, and that their political opposition were a bunch of fascists, and we don't have to listen to a word they have to say. And I'm sorry, but that means that you do not have the ability anymore to get the advanced warning and the signal that says, wait a second, what you're saying right now is really unpopular with voters, because you only are filtering everything out except for the people who are your echo chamber, your Hosanna chorus.
It's the same thing in the cultural sphere. It's not just the political sphere, right? It's
it's the cultural sphere and this dumb idea among. Listen, I don't want to be the old man picking it because you guys are great, but there's something about the Gen Z millennials where they believe that if they encounter views that kind of go against some of their core beliefs, that it's somehow harmful to them, and they don't engage it. And that they shouldn't be asked to endure exposure to that kind of stuff. And I would really like it if all of these people who really believe that would just be disabused of this notion, because it's just not true. And you can't live in a free society and think that way. And you cannot agitate and expect for various nodes of authority to protect you from these kinds of things. And that's why I'm so wary of it, because even though I'm Jewish and I can't stand anti-Semitism, but I almost think there's a bigger fight that we have right now, which is to just stop being such wusses. Like, we have to have a society where it's okay for people to occasionally be offended and it's not the end of the world. And people are using this complaint about their mental health, or it's like words or violence or whatever it is, as a trans non-binary person. I'm here to tell you that, this is so offensive and da-da-da-da-da. And it's basically a way to censor anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. And I just think that more and more people, you can think that, but I want the people in authority to have some backbone to say no. Whether you're a school principal or like a, politician or like the president of a university, just say no, to quote Nancy Reagan.
I'm fully in endorsement of everything you said, but that's also why it's terrifying when you get Carrie Lakes in position of power, because do I think that a Trump or Trump adjacent government is going to be more inclusive of offensive speech? No, it's just going to change the direction of offense. This is a person, this is a movement whose psychology is that anything that offends the person of Donald Trump needs to be canceled. Whether it's a Republican who disagrees.
Yeah, but I don't know. Well, first of all, I'm not so sure that they're going to do that. And if they do, I will be first. But I don't think Republicans are doing that. I don't think they're saying that.
I'm the person who said that who says that a lot about people like ISIS, and like take them at their word when they're talking about their Islamo-supremacist worldview. I also take people at their word when they say that the election was fake, that Biden didn't win, and implicitly that Trump running again, there is no legitimate way in which he could lose. Meaning, no matter what the vote says.
That's a separate. Hold on, wait a second. Hold on. To me, that's a separate issue, my friend. That's a separate issue. I don't think you're going to have Republicans saying you can't say anything that offends Trump or denigrates Trump, because we can go back to the 4 years of his presidency when everything that was on cable news was denigrating Trump. And there was nothing, he did not do anything. He mused at times about like changing the libel laws, and they were very bad ideas, and I didn't like that. He said mean things about my tribe of journalists. Okay, fine, that's not good either. But I know enough, and I've been around long enough to know that there was far more stuff that the Justice Department did under Barack Obama that was much more of a threat in terms of investigating journalists, in terms of classified leaks, than what Trump didn't. Like, what did Trump do on this regard? I mean, like, I guess he insulted Jim Acosta at a press conference or something.
You can also blame incompetence to his inability.
Yeah, but I don't think that's the danger. I'm agreeing with you that Trump's a danger, but that's not the danger.
No, I don't.
It's a different danger from the left. The left's danger is that they're busybodies who take over bureaucracies, and they're going to use that power as they march through the institutions to just kind of try to impose their agenda by censoring speech that they don't like.
Their march is complete. I think now we are primed to. Don't you think so? I mean, they've marched through.
I want to get back to Carrie Lake. Carrie Lake offends me. She's an election denier. I would agree with that. Okay. However, I'm willing to live with her winning in a red wave, if only because it will send, hopefully, an important signal to the Democrats to like end this stuff that is creating this response. Like, if we could get a moment where the Democrats are like, okay, let's really examine, like, why did we lose and flame out so badly? That will be a good thing for the country. And that's why I think like democratic republics are a better system of government than all the alternatives, because it does have this natural feedback system
of self-correction.
And that's why, like, when they say vote like democracy's on the line for the same shit, for like more inflation and like rising crime rates and gaslighting and not being honest with us about how president is probably like not mentally all there. Like, you want me to endorse more of that, more Department of Homeland Security censoring the internet, more of that? Fuck you. I'm not going to vote for that. There. Yeah, no, rant over.
I know. I'm totally down with the idea that you want to send a signal, and I'm totally down with the idea that both parties, by the way, need to get slapped in the face. But do you really think that's going to happen? Did Republicans go through any soul searching about Trump after having several states where down the ballot Republicans were winning, but Trump wasn't elected, but Biden was elected president. Did they go to any, maybe we should distance ourselves from Trump? Maybe for like a day. There was a day where they considered it.
No, listen, you make a very good point. However, the difference is there is no demagogue at the top of the Democratic Party right now. That's one of the good things about having, Sleepy Joe at the top of the ticket, so to speak.
So you think it's more easily fixable?
Well, I do think it's easily fixable.
The knives are already coming out for Biden, so it's...
They should.
As well they should, I agree.
Can we just say, I know. Vanessa, you know what? We haven't heard from you. Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Is President Biden mentally competent right now? Should he be the president?
So you're talking to someone who does not follow the news. I'm not a news junkie. I am a person, if it filters through to me, it's because somebody shared it or something really big has happened.
Or one of your flatmates ranted about it.
Correct. Such as Adam or Emma or my husband. So what's filtering through to me is not... I don't feel like he's doing a great job, but I also can't point any fingers to what he's doing terribly. I just have a sense of it's like he's just ambling along. And I know that inflation is a problem.
I'm just saying he's making a lot of mistakes that you can't just explain as like, oh, well, Joe's always been like that.
Mm-hmm.
He was a competent politician in the past, a competent politician with plenty of gaffes and not particularly profound, but at least politically savvy enough to get along. If you watched his Democracy in Peril Part 2 speech, it's just it's not great.
And the mistakes are domestic, international, on all fronts.
He's like shaking hands with like the air. Like I'm just saying, there's something like he's not all there. He needs naps. I'm not.
I mean, he's not a young guy. He's a very, very old, one of our oldest presidents.
He's going to be 80.
Yeah. Right. And the question is not should he be euthanized, but should he be president?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, give him a podcast. I think he could handle that. Anyway. Vanessa, I have to ask, like, so is your bag is like your cultural?
Architecture urbanism is my bag. Yes.
Is that your bag?
So
all right.
I am a lefty, but not of a political persuasion. So insofar as I just culturally have been raised on the left, and this podcast is Dom and I having conversations with people that I never would have.
That's so cool.
And so it's part me learning and part me questioning things that I have sometimes taken for granted.
And also pushing against my suppositions as somebody who's, some would argue, too immersed in some of this bullshit.
Have you, well, I guess the question for both of you, have you read Caro's masterful biography of Robert Moses?
The Power Broker?
Yeah.
Yes. It is on my to read. Everyone talks about it to me constantly.
It is dope as hell. It is so good. You got to read it.
I will.
And then get into his Lyndon Johnson stuff, which is also great. But as an architect, as somebody who's interested in urban planning, it unlocks so many things. It's like a great biography, but it's more than a biography. It's like a history of like New York City and like why it's laid out the way it is. It's great.
Yes, and I just bought tickets to Straight Line Crazy, so I'm going to see that tomorrow.
What is that?
That's the new play about Robert Moses, starring Ralph Fiennes.
Oh, okay. If I'm in New York, I love New York. I got to go to New York, and that's something I would like to see.
But maybe you know somebody.
No, I mean I'm in DC, but I'll wait for it. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, great book, Power Broker.
I've heard it recommended many times. Robert Caro is an exceptional biographer. So
yeah. It's great. I mean, I did you read the Robert Caro? It's not exactly an autobiography, but kind of like his journal about writing, about the craft.
No, I have not read that yet, and I should read that because I've read everything else by Caro, and I love his. I
didn't read the Johnson yet.
Oh my God, the Johnson's really good too. It's like what you get out of the Johnson one. Well, what you get out of the Johnson one is like a history. It's also a history of the Senate. It's the history of like Washington in the middle of the century. It's really good.
Yeah. Okay.
Should we close with our blind spots question?
No, before the blind spot question, I just want to give you a chance to, what's a neoconservative? Are you one? And why are you trying to take over the world?
Neoconservative or new conservative?
Neoconservative. That's my Israeli accent.
Well, the definition of neoconservative from Irving Kristol was somebody who was on the left who migrated to the right, which is fairly general. But I think that's pretty. I mean, listen, it's the meaning of the word has been twisted beyond recognition. Right. I call myself a neoconservative more now out of defiance.
That's why I identify one just because it really gets people annoyed.
Well, not as a troll, but just because I just think it's like if people try to demonize the neocons in unfair ways, and I'm like, all right, you know what,
well, I call myself
wear
an
it
American
proudly, and that was originally the thing because neocon was a slur from Michael Harrington and the Socialists against their old friends who went to the right, and Kristol was like, you know what, fine, then call us. It's like the way that gay people started calling themselves queer. So it's like neocon became was originally like that, and then there's like, hey, you're damn right, I'm a neocon, and then there's a period where there's they were saying oh my god, neocons are just these people. It's like a synonym for Zionists trying to take over the world, and that's not true. And
I actually the way I use it, it's also not as a troll, but sometimes I call myself even more defiantly, I guess, as an American imperialist, and that's just because there's an
that is a troll. I like that.
It's not completely a troll because because we were obviously talking about not real imperialism, we're talking about some of the cultural influences and just growing up and being surrounded by people who, especially professionally, who sort of take for granted that American influence around the world is by definition corrosive, no matter what. It kind of bugs me as a non-American.
So I guess I would say I call myself a neocon just because I'm old enough and I lived through the George W. Bush, travails and everything like that. And that the word had, I don't know, I just sort of stuck with the neocons. And I write, and now I write a column for the New York Sun. I'm a contributing editor of Commentary Magazine, which is a flagship neoconservative publication. Although what I've been writing recently for Commentary wouldn't fit neatly into the neocon. And I certainly am in a very different place right now politically than say Bill Kristol or some of the other neocons who became Never Trump, because I'm really concerned about abuses at the FBI. And I have to say one of my things is that become somewhat red-pilled on some of this issues having to do with domestic surveillance.
That's why I brought it up. Yeah. Yeah, which I find fascinating. So can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, no. So I'm very much I'm very proud of this piece. I think it's really good. It'll be out in the next. It's very long. It's be a big long essay in the next Commentary Magazine, which everybody should read. But it's a look at the FBI from a kind of historical perspective. And one of the things that I get into in this essay is how, is it okay that after 9/11, the FBI basically started infiltrating Muslim American communities and, and preventing terror attacks by sending informants to try to get people who might be kind of these loner loser types, to agree to some sort of plan. And then we find out one of these people have been working for the government the whole time. I'm uncomfortable with it. I'm uncomfortable with it in perpetuity. And now that technique is being used against so-called domestic extremists. And I'm against racism. I'm against the domestic extremists. I'm against, white power militias. All that stuff sucks. And I want the feds, I think so far there's a danger, but I think there's a problem when we look at the case of that kidnapping plot against Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. Most of the people involved in the plot were working for the FBI in some capacity.
Yeah.
So did you prevent terrorism or did you just sort of entice?
Did you instigate
it? I made a joke, but if I was, what's her name? Tudor Davis, I think who was the person running against Gretchen Whitmer. But I would say Gretchen Whitmer, do you have a plan for protecting the governor's mansion from various plots by the FBI and the suckers that they entice? So does that make me, I'll call myself a neocon, but I'm very skeptical. I'm much more of a skeptic of some of these kinds of state powers. I'm certainly no longer I think that there was a blind spot and that everybody thought America could do anything in terms of nation building. I think it's much harder. There's to be much more of a serious commitment to it. But I still believe America should be a great power. And I think American hegemony is largely a good thing for the world as opposed to any of the realistic alternatives to it. Yeah. So, exactly. I'm kind of a neocon, but I think we've all changed.
Anytime that an ideology leads you to be so gung-ho that you can't see where your own side is violating some kind of civil rights or human rights. And I think there during the Bush years, there was a lot of shit. And I mean, there is something weird when you see people like Tucker Carlson now suddenly discovering the abuses of power by the DOJ because it's afflicting his side. But on the other hand, you know, it's good. Like, actually, skepticism about state power is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
However you ended up in this camp, although there is a way, like, you can cross the line.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing, is that there's an internal contradiction in the kind of Bush era conservatism, because Bush himself was skeptical of, you know, large domestic government programs. I mean, this goes back to F.A. Hayek and others who would say, you know, like, listen, when you create a bureaucracy, it will never get rid of itself. It'll never solve the problem you're intending to solve. And you should be very wary of that. And that's why, like, traditionally, Republicans and conservatives like free market solutions and things like that. Well, like, what is a nation building project in the Middle East other than an enormous government program? So you don't think that
and the carve out for the security state domestically.
Exactly. Like, so those are government programs, and wouldn't they be subjected to the same laws, you know, the same Hayekian principles, if you will, as these other programs that you don't like? And I was aware of this. I wrote a piece for Reason Magazine, and, you know, during the Bush years, called the 9/14 presidency, where I identified some of these things. If anything, I think I've become like more like aware of it. I was always a little bit of an oddball in that respect.
No, that's why I didn't even pick on you on this. I was Tucker Carlson, on the other hand. I distinctly remember.
Well, Tucker used to be a major league neocon. He used to write for the Weekly Standard.
Okay, Vanessa, shall we blind spots?
Okay, so this is the question we like to ask all of our guests as our closer. What are the biggest blind spots on the left? What are the biggest blind spots on the right?
Oh, wow, those are good. You got to give me a second here. I got to think about that, because that's a smart question.
Mull it over.
All right. It depends. First of all, I don't know what part of the right we're talking about, but if let's say there's kind of an ascendant NatCon, nationalist right. Okay, so that's
the post-liberal.
Somewhat post-liberal. So here's where I think there's a real blind spot. The idea that we should use political power to accomplish our ends in these other areas. The blind spot is what happens if you lose political power? Won't you be giving a permission structure for your adversaries to do the same damn thing? To which I think the NatCons would say, hey, they're already doing it, so we have no choice. We have to do it. To which I'm saying, wouldn't it be better if you could devise a system and get buy-in from everybody where nobody did it? Wouldn't that be good? So that's a blind spot on the right now that I'm worried about. Okay, let me think of like the real blind spot on the left. All right, I got to come up with a good one here. So many. Okay, here's a basic one that I think is a blind spot on the left. Nobody outside of a very cloistered online community and a couple faculty lounges thinks there are more than two genders. Just give up on it. You're not going to get people to stop using the word mother, okay? And you're not going to, birthing person, stop it, okay? It's been around forever. It is fake history. It's fake anthropology to say, oh, there have been other cultures where there have been third genders and fourth genders. No. And I'm just telling you, I have nothing against, if you can be whatever you want to be. I respect choices of adults to be whatever they want to be. I'm a libertarian in that way. I believe in maximal social freedom, where I love America because we're a big country. You can have all kinds of community. But the idea that you want to try police language in a way to somehow break the gender binary is ridiculous. And you will lose. And if you think that that's progress, it's just, you're Don Quixote. You are waving at windmills.
It's funny. I think the policing is the problem, but I actually think that there is a bit of an inevitable march towards including things like they and non-binary. I think that will happen eventually, but in many ways, despite the way people are acting right now.
Okay, you know what? I could be wrong. Maybe that's my blind spot. It's my blind spot is that I just, you know what I mean? But like this, when I see the people say, well, there are tomboys and then there's really girly girls. I'm like, yeah, but they're, Anyway,
I feel like there is something about the way that this conversation is being policed that my guess is that it ends up increasing anxiety on people who have some identity confusion or uncertainty, and letting people explore the mysteries of their own identity. I think that's great on an individual level. But when you're trying to solve it by creating a gazillion buckets that they need to choose from, I think I'm not convinced that that's the healthiest way. But I don't know.
I think that's why queer has stuck around, because it's so flexible.
Queer is wonderful. Also, the idea of queer is just great because you're saying, I'm flouting whatever you're trying to shove me into.
one of my best friend is gay. Jamie Kerchick. You should have on the show.
We reached out.
Okay, well, I'll tell him. Okay, you guys do a good show. I'm glad you guys are doing this. But like, if I know people that you say, I'm queer, but they F women. I'm like, okay, like, so how are you queer? Just because I want to identify that way. I'm like, well, then just...
Okay, but that's not the queer that I'm talking about. Sure, there is some element where you find those totally straight guys and you ask them, did you ever fuck something that isn't a girl? And they'll say no, but they'll still identify as queer. And like, okay, now you're just playing into a fashion. And yes, that exists. There are people who are exploiting this permissiveness and think that if they don't tag themselves as something that is outside the binary, then they are boring. So they have to be something special. They have to try to go outside of the old norms. But queerness is still a great category because it allows you to exist in the mess of sexuality without depending on a specific, narrow, overly defined category. It allows you to be in a muck of figure it out for yourself, like find your own individual experience. And that's great. Be as weird as you want to be and let yourself be fucked by whoever you want to be. That's great. My problem is with the over-categorization and shoving people into increasingly diminishing but still highly specific boxes, and then pretending that that's somehow fluid and progress.
You're erasing gays and lesbians.
I'm erasing gays and lesbians?
Yeah, you are, because there's a specific... Gays have a gay culture. There's a gay history. There's lesbians have a lesbian culture, lesbian history. And the idea that now everything's just queer...
It's not that like, everything is queer. Is that the existence of queer is fine. Not instead of gay and lesbian culture.
You know what? But it's not my fight because I'm not gay. So, I mean, I don't want to like, it's not like my thing. It's like when people get like overly upset about anti-Semitism and they're not Jewish.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think the only passion that I bring into this is because I was involved from the secular perspective, because I was trying to create a liberal space for expression in Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, the Pride Parade was actually a meaningful statement. It was not just a festival. It was actually a statement about you're not going to banish gay people from the city. You're going to let them march. You're going to let them be themselves. Growing up around that community, the idea of queerness was not in any way racery. It was about letting people find their own individual expression within the messy realm of sexuality and not letting it be constrained by the religious authorities that ran the city.
You're just pinkwashing.
I'm pinkwashing the occupation.
You're pinkwashing like one day we'll have a free Palestine where gay people will be hung and executed for their sexual
That is exactly what I'm doing.
I will not accept this pinkwashing until Palestine is liberated from the river.
Well, I'll consider that closing the circle.
There you go.
Eli,
this was a lot of fun,
awesome.
everybody.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Well, I love what you guys are doing. I think it's really so necessary right now. I just wanted to say that we're going to get past this moment of anxiety and intolerance. And it's going to be because of the work of young people like you guys. So thank you.
I appreciate the optimism.
And people should, yes, that is very optimistic. And people should absolutely listen to the re-education as well, because you're also doing this work.
Thank you. Just so you like the show.
It's great. I love it.
Yes, we do. We've been listening to it in preparation. So we've been enjoying
the new one,
the monologues.
Thank you. I love the monologues.
Like very good. And I can't imagine preparing those for every episode.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, which is why we're going to start monetizing, because I got to get some cash for it. Anyway, but
it's a worthy product.
I will say this. The latest one called Red Wave Over Israel is a good monologue. It's all about Meir Kahane and the Judeo-fascism.
Go listen to the re-education before it costs you $8 for the re-education check mark.
All right, thanks guys.
Eli.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Last time we chatted, you and Adam were essentially on the same page that you were predicting a tsunami, a kind of backlash against the Democrats' kind of focus on policing language and all of this stuff, and that there was going to be a backlash against them in the midterms, pretty wide scale.
And inflation and crime.
And sorry?
And inflation and crime.
Their lack of focus on those two issues, right?
Yeah.
But it didn't really pan out so much as a tsunami. So I wanted to give you both a chance to reflect on that. And
what did I say? I don't remember, but I hope I didn't say anything too embarrassing.
Basically, you were just like, you were pretty certain that it was going to be a tsunami because of the
We were both.
Right.
We were both very like, okay, like they're getting what's
right,
coming.
Exactly.
And apparently Republicans also got what was coming to them. So what are your thoughts?
I was going to make a joke.
Go for it.
I don't recognize my country anymore. We're just turning into like Orwell's, 1984. People love their chains. They love their oppression. I'm sorry. I'm fighting this horrible cold that I got from my daughter.
It gives you gravitas.
So that's why my voice is so raspy.
Also, it's not the midterms.
It's not the beleaguered.
Give you the
No,
malaise.
it's not the midterms. No, it's I love my daughter, but she got the whole household sick. Okay. But I obviously don't think that. First of all, how many times before a major national election do we have to relearn the lesson that all of the polls are wrong? So that's A.
We really need to get over that point where pollsters and poll readers start believing themselves, like around like a few months before the election, they're like really starting to take it seriously, and you just get swept up.
You do, and every year we find out that it was. I mean, there were some polls that were correct. New York Times Siena College was totally right. It looks like, but there were a lot of pollsters who had gotten the last one right that were then like, I don't know. They were feeding us like on certain races, they were totally wrong. And I'm not a super political junkie, but there are people who said that Tiffany Smiley in Washington State was really competitive. That didn't turn out to be true. I'm not sure that there's a single explanation. I will say a couple points. One, I'm actually sort of happy that electorally speaking, it looks like a targeted strike against election denying Trumpists. So it's like, as somebody who is a neither Trumper, who doesn't like Trump, but doesn't like the Democrats and their resistance to Trump, there was something pretty good about this election in that respect. If I was a partisan Democrat, I would worry that the important signal that would come to the Biden White House in a resounding loss has not been received, and that it looks like it's already maybe leading them to assume that Biden was doing great, and if he's nominated again for 2024, I think it ends in tears for the Democrats.
There's a headline on The Hill that is Democrats faced uncertainties amid invigorating success.
Yeah,
maybe that's overreading what happened.
Yeah. I mean, so that's another point, which is like, I think part of it was that there were really bad candidates. And you can look at individual examples like, Brian Kemp walks away with it. He's the governor who stands up to Trump in 2020 and insists the election isn't stolen and doesn't go along with him. And yet Herschel Walker, it runs to, a near tie, so it's a runoff. Well, there's 6 or 7 or 8 electoral points. What accounts for that? Well, I think it accounts for if you offer an alternative to Democrats that doesn't embrace, like lunatic conspiracy stuff about elections, you're in good shape.
What about Democrats what about New York and California? Do you think they are starting to hear the message? New York, at least, got not pilloried, but and Hochul did win governorship, but New York suffered a little.
It's closer than it normally is.
Yeah.
There are a lot of House races that went to the Republicans that normally wouldn't, and I think it's because there's a backlash on that. So, I mean, we'll see. I'm incredibly unimpressed with Hochul, so it's disappointing to sort of see her win. But if she's savvy, she will internalize the lesson. I don't think Gavin Newsom really is capable of that in California. But there's all kinds of signs in California, starting with earlier this year with the recall of Chesa Boudin, that, and we don't know what's going to happen in LA, but if the, candidate who was recently a Republican, who I guess now is an independent Democrat or something, Caruso, the businessman, defeats Karen Bass, that's a huge deal in Los Angeles. That's a rebuke of business as usual as well. So, I mean, maybe this is exactly the results we have. Here's the other thing. So far, even the deniers have accepted their losses in the elections. That's really good. It's a really low bar, and there's a part of me that's reminded of the famous Chris Rock joke. You're supposed to take care of your kids. But we didn't have that in 2020, so how nice is it that everybody's kind of saying, all right, I lost the election. So that's good too.
I had a theory before that if it did go more red, that it would be because folks were just more focused on inflation than abortion. And I was concerned about it because as someone who's pro-choice, I felt like government could do very little about inflation that would be meaningful, but it seemed like now was the time to put legislative pressure on abortion. Do you think that might have driven folks to the polls? Like, it seemed like potentially they were more issued oriented this midterms.
Again, and I'm not the best. I'm not a political junkie type, but obviously the abortion issue motivated a lot of voters, and in some ways, I don't know if it'll continue to motivate them, because I just think that we're now getting to this point where there's going to be a lot of states where abortion will be, there'll be fewer restrictions on abortion than it was under the Roe and Kasiq precedents. And there's going to be states that are going to outlaw it. But I don't think I did a podcast on this several months ago. And I basically came around to the idea that we're not going to return to the nightmarish pre-Roe world. And I have to say, for that episode, I recommend it. It's called The Feminist Critique, play on the Betty Friedan book. I did a lot of research to educate myself as a, straight Ashkenazi American male about the issue. And it was horrifying what women had to go through if they wanted to get an abortion under the pre-Roe regime. The stories, I don't think that you can't help but move you. I mean, one woman, and I played a clip of her, talked about how she was told when she was getting her abortion that even though she was in anguish and pain, she couldn't scream because it would tip off the neighbors and potentially get everybody in serious trouble with the cops. Then the abortion doctor literally showed her fetus right after it, which is psychologically scarring, and then proceeded to molest her, and then lecture her as he was molesting her that she had to, be committed to chastity. What a terrible world that is. A world we should never return to. But then I analyze it and think to myself, was the world like that solely because of the law? In part it was, but it was also the culture. And so what was the victory of second wave feminism? Because they lost on ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, in the 70s. But what they really succeeded at is changing our culture. I was born in 1972. My mother was very liberal. My mother was a feminist. But I didn't know anybody growing up that believed some of these like troglodyte ideas that I would associate with the men of that pre-Roe v. Wade world. And to me, that's, the nation owes a great debt for the cultural work done by Ms. Magazine and Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan, the original National Organization for Women. Even if I disagree with their positions today on how unrestricted abortion should be or whatever, there was such a huge hurdle that was overcome that we take for granted. And in that respect, I say, I don't think we can go back to that world because cultural change is much more significant in some ways than, a Supreme Court decision.
So maybe we'll end on this question because you made me think of it. It's a topic that I love coming back to. There is a faction, and the size of which is hard to determine, but people on the right who do seem to have some nostalgic outlook on the more overtly troglodyte lifestyle. People with medieval nostalgia, people with integralist fantasies. Do you think that type of reassertion of, I don't want to use the word, patriarchal, but old world tendencies can really lay roots in our politics?
I mean, do they really want it? I mean, listen, we all know who Phyllis Schlafly was, right? Okay. She would say that she believes she'd like to return to traditional, and that housewives shouldn't feel guilty for having the most important job in the world, raising their kids. By the way, I kind of agree with that in a vacuum. But here was this incredibly impressive woman who prevented the ERA. It was a major part of the American conservative movement beyond just on the issue of feminism. And she would begin her public appearances by saying, I want to thank my husband, Fred, for allowing me to address you today, which was a troll. Because the reality is she was this incredibly dynamic and talented person. To use an expression, she was wearing the pants in that family. She was the one who was relevant, and she did it and she demonstrated it in her dynamism. And what you find in the socially conservative ranks are not women submitting to living in a world where they only exist as an extension of men as part of a marriage. As Betty Friedan would say, they only exist as sort of instrumentalities for, men or children or something. No, there are incredibly socially conservative women who are achieving great things, who are fully engaged in a kind of political fight. So I think it's a little bit different. I think that it's more accurate to say, listen, I'm sure you can find examples of it, but I think it's more accurate to say that there are people who are on the social conservative right that if they were being, what they are criticizing is the excesses of feminism and the effects of,
or the liberal
the
world
legacy
at
of the
large.
boom. Right. But, we live in a world where people like to make it, kind of get attention for tweaking things and making extreme versions of the argument. So like, I want to return to that sort of thing. So listen, Matt Walsh, you know who he is? I'm sure we all do, right? The Daily Caller guy who did What is a Woman? Which I thought was a pretty good documentary, even though I knew it was coming from a particular point of view. At the end of it, he's trolling. There's a scene with his wife, says she can't open a jar of pickles and gives it to him and he opens it. Does he want to return to the 1950s? No. You know what I'm saying? I don't think he does. But it's his way. I think it's sometimes these are ways of trying to antagonize one's cultural political opposition.
Okay. 15 minutes on the dot.
Bingo.
Thank you for listening to Uncertain Things. We're uncertain.substack.com, where we have a newsletter too, and wherever you get your podcasts. Give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts if you want to support us, and share us with your friends and enemies. Until next time, stay sane.